Hey guys, it's Alexandra from iloveknots.com. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a 12-inch wreath form using my Through the Window stitch pattern. This is a Mosaic crochet stitch pattern. I've named this series on my blog Through the Window because to me it looks like we are looking through a window. This variegated pattern really reminds me of spring and of a watercolor painting, which I find the name of it to be really fitting because the variegated color is called Monet. This pattern is really easy to work. It's just chains, single crochet, and double crochet. I'm going to show you how to do that. I've already worked my entire piece, my entire length, and I just need to sew it together. So I'm going to show you a small sample of this stitch pattern, and then I'm going to show you how to finish the edges and how to sew it on a 12-inch styrofoam wreath base. You're going to find a link to this crochet pattern in the description below. To make your own wreath, you're going to need worsted weight yarn. My favorite one for wreaths is Red Heart Super Saver, so that's what I'm using. Bernat Super Value and Caron 1 pound are very similar, and they also make really great wreaths. By nature, this yarn is kind of rough, and it makes it a lot more durable for home projects. If the roughness of Red Heart Super Saver bothers you, like maybe it bothers your hands when you're crocheting with it and you don't want to work with it, you can stick the whole ball of yarn in a lingerie mesh bag and then wash and dry it and then crochet with it. It will make it easier on your hands. You're also going to need an H8 5mm crochet hook. There is a little bit of wiggle room on this because the width does not have to be exact, as the cover is going to stretch to fit the wreath base, but you want to get pretty close. So after you work a few rows, you'll want to measure the width to make sure that you're pretty close to the size needed. Mine is 4 3/4 inches wide. Alright, I have my two colors here. I have soft white and I have buff, and I have my crochet hook. I'm going to use soft white as the main color, and buff is going to be the color that's going to pop through. So I'm going to start with my main color first and a slip knot. To make a slip knot, we take the yarn tail, we pull it over our fingers, wrap the yarn around your index finger 2 times, hold the tension with your thumb and your middle finger, take the loop that's on the left, pull it up over the other loop but not off your finger. Then you'll pull the loop that's on the left now, up over the other loop and off your finger. Take your crochet hook, insert it into the loop that's on your finger. You can hold the working yarn in your right hand and pull the short tail end, and it'll tighten that knot up. For this stitch pattern, the chain is a multiple of 4 plus 3. For our wreath form cover, we're going to start with a chain 19. To chain, we're going to yarn over, pull through the loop on our hook. Yarn over, pull through the loop on our hook. Yarn over, pull through the loop on our hook. That's 3 chains right now. Go ahead and keep working until you have 19 chains on your hook. For this stitch pattern, we normally work 2 rows in this main color, but because of the way that I want to seam up the wreath cover, we're only going to work 1 row in this main color. For this first row, we're going to single crochet into the second chain and each chain all the way across. We don't count this loop that's on our hook. We skip the first stitch, and in the second chain, we're going to insert our hook right into the center. Yarn over, pull through that stitch. You have 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over, pull through both loops. Insert your hook into the center of the next chain, yarn over, pull through. There are 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through both loops. We're going to continue single crocheting all the way across the row. I'm going to add my new color in this last stitch, so I'm not going to finish the whole entire stitch. I'm going to insert my hook into this last chain, yarn over, pull through. I have 2 loops, and now I'm going to pause. I'm going to hold the tension here with my index finger from my right hand so that it doesn't go anywhere. I'm grabbing my second color. I want a small tail end that is long enough that I can comfortably weave in later, and then I've created a loop. I'm going to put that loop on my hook, and I'm going to pull it through both loops there that are there. It's going to count as the yarn over and pull through for that single crochet. And now when we work the next row, we're ready to start in our new color. This is row 1. Row 2 is going to be chain 1, turn. We're going to single crochet into the first 2 stitches. So we'll insert our hook into the stitch, picking up both loops of that top V, yarn over and complete your single crochet. Insert your hook into the next stitch, picking up both loops from that top V, and complete a single crochet. Next, we're going to chain 2, then we're going to skip 2 stitches, and we're going to single crochet into the next stitch. So I'm skipping this stitch, and then I'm going to single crochet into the next stitch, and single crochet into the stitch after that as well. Then we're going to chain 2, skip the next 2 stitches, single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. Chain 2, skip 2 stitches, single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. One more time. There is row 2, which is starting the basis for our mosaic stitching with these chains and skip stitches. Row 3 is going to be very similar. We're going to chain 1 and turn, single crochet into the first 2 single crochets, chain 2, skip the next chain space, single crochet into each of the next 2 single crochets. Chain 2, skip the next chain space, single crochet into each of the next 2 single crochets. Go ahead and continue across the row. And when we get to this last single crochet, we're going to change colors back to white. So we're only going to single crochet the first half. Insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull through, 2 loops on your hook. Now I'm going to hold the tension with my right hand so that doesn't go anywhere. And I'm going to just drop this brown yarn that I'm working with. I'm just going to drop it. Then I'm going to pick up this white yarn. So I've dropped this brown to the back, and I'm pulling the white yarn from under it over here on the left. I'm going to yarn over with my hook and pull it through. when you yarn over, you want to make sure that you're not yarning over too close to the base. You want this yarn strand to have enough slack so that it comfortably lays along the side of the fabric. You don't want it to bunch up on this side. So you can lay it against the row here, make sure it's tall enough, and then just naturally grab it from there. You don't want it to have too much slack, but you also don't want it to be too tight. Then you'll just take that brown, tighten this stitch up to normal tension so it looks like the rest if it's stretched out a little bit. And now we're ready to start row 4. So just real quick, row 2 and row 3 are worked very similarly, and now you should have 2 rows of single crochets stacked on each other and 2 rows of chain spaces stacked on each other. Row 4, chain 1, turn. We're going to single crochet into the first 2 single crochets. Now we're going to work a double crochet 2 rows down. We're going to ignore these chains for a minute, and we're going to go all the way down to that white row down below. And you can see you have 2 stitches right there that you skipped. We're going to work into those stitches. For the double crochet, we're going to yarn over. Then we're going to push those chains to the back. We don't want anything to do with those for the time being because our stitch is going to lay on top of them. So we're pushing them to the back. We're going to insert our hook into the stitch from the right side to the wrong side, just picking up that stitch on our hook. So the chains are behind where I'm working, and I have just this stitch on my hook. Then I'll yarn over, pull through. I have 3 loops on my hook. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. We'll do that one more time over here. Yarn over. Insert your hook into that stitch only, not picking up the chains. The chains are in the back. Yarn over, pull through. There are 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Then we're going to single crochet into each of the next 2 single crochets. By working those single crochets, you are securing these double crochets to the fabric. And if you look at the wrong side, the chains are here behind your stitches. You're almost not even going to notice them because it's going to look just solid there. But that's where those chains are. So we're going to do that again here. You're going to do that each time you're working over the chains. Push the chains to the back and pull the fabric forward on the bottom. Insert your hook into just that stitch, not touching the chains in the back, and complete a double crochet. Then you'll double crochet into the next stitch as well, just picking up only that stitch on your hook. Single crochet into each of the next 2 single crochets, and we'll continue across. There's row 4. We've single crocheted into each of the single crochets and double crocheted 2 rows down into each of those skipped stitches. At the end of the row, we've ended with 2 single crochets. For row 5, we're going to chain 1 and turn, and we're going to single crochet into each stitch all the way across, leaving just half a stitch worked in the last stitch so we can change colors. Before I finish the other half of that color change, I'm going to pause here for a moment. This is the end of row 5. I'm going to flip it to the right side. Our entire piece is going to be made up of one repeat, and that's going to be row 2, row 3, row 4, and row 5. 2 rows in color 2, 2 rows in your main color. So I'm going to run through that with you one more time. Let's go ahead and work our color change here. I've worked the first half. I'm holding the tension here. The color that I'm working with, I'm going to drop it to the back, and I'm going to pull up that other color. I want it to just be as natural as possible when I yarn over and pull it through the loops. We don't want this float on the side to be too tight, and we don't want it to be too loose. We just want it to be as natural as possible. Then we'll chain 1 and turn. The first row of the repeat is going to be row 2. Row 2 is going to be single crochet into the first 2 stitches, chain 2, skip the next 2 stitches, single crochet into the next 2 stitches, chain 2, skip the next 2 stitches, single crochet into the next 2 stitches. Continue that repeat across, chain 2, skip 2 stitches, single crochet into the next 2 stitches. Row 3, chain 1, turn, single crochet into the first 2 single crochets, chain 2, skip the next chain space, single crochet into the next 2 single crochets. Continue that repeat, chain 2, skip the next chain space, single crochet into the next 2 single crochets. Here in the last stitch, we're going to work the first half of our single crochet, drop the brown yarn to the back, pick up the white yarn, naturally yarn over, pull through, and just check your slack here. If it's too much or not enough, you can just pull your stitch out and redo it. You just want it to naturally lay flat. Row 4, chain 1, turn, single crochet into the first 2 single crochets, double crochet 2 rows down into each of the empty stitches. Make sure you push those chains to the back so that you don't pick it up. You just want the stitch from 2 rows down on your hook, and the chains lay across the back. Then we single crochet into each of the next 2 single crochets. Then we double crochet 2 rows down, single crochet into each of the next 2 single crochets. Continue that across, double crochet 2 rows down, times 2, single crochet next 2 single crochets, And row 5 is going to be chain 1, turn, single crochet all the way across the row. And there's the end of the repeat. I'm going to flip this to the right side. I did work all the way across the row here, but you're actually going to work just the first half of that stitch and then pull up your new color. This is what the stitch pattern looks like. It's coming together really nicely. You're going to continue working that repeat of row 2, 3, 4, and 5 over and over again. When you get to the end of this piece, you're actually going to finish on a row 5. You're not going to do the complete repeat, and that is so that when we join our ends on the wreath form, it's not going to be too thick of a white piece. And what I mean is just right here, I didn't want to add the 2 rows, the 2 extra rows to make this too thick. So this piece here with the variegated yarn, that's my reform cover, and I've worked a total of 132 rows. When you measure the length, it is about 30 inches long. That's how much you're going to need for your wreath cover for a 12-inch styrofoam wreath. I just got this at Joann's. They also sell green colored ones at Dollar Tree. Either one will work because you're not going to see the color come through. So go ahead and work your piece all the way until you're finished. 132 rows, 30 inches long. Remember that when you end, you just want to end on a row 5, not on a row 6. And then I'm going to show you how we're going to do the ends so that we can finish the left and the right side. Alright, so I have 132 rows finished here. I have finished on a row 4, which means I've just worked 1 row in my main color. That's the single crochet and double crochet row to cover up those skipped stitches. I want to add a border around this so that it covers up my yarn floats on the one side, and so that when I sew it together you won't see white sewing against this variegated color. You won't see the seam very much in this wreath, but if you do, I want to make sure that it's just seamless. I went ahead and fastened off my second color because I'm no longer using that. I don't want to fasten off and have to sew in some more ends, so I'm just going to add the border here. I want to do it on the right side still, so I'm going to start with a chain 1. Then I'm going to go into the side of my last single crochet. So I'm going to insert directly into the center of that single crochet, right on the edge, and you should pick up 2 loops on your hook. Then I'm going to yarn over and pull through, and then complete a single crochet. That chain 1 gives me the height to start a new row, and the side edge is where we're going to be working our border. I'm going to continue to work evenly down the side. Evenly means working 1 single crochet per row of single crochet. All of the rows that we worked here are single crochet rows because they all have single crochet here on the ends. So for every white row, I'm going to have 2 single crochets, and for every variegated row, I'm going to have 2 single crochets. That's the easiest way to look at it as you work. So there's 2 different types of stitches you'll see here because one is from the right side and one is from the wrong side. So the next stitch that we have is just like a hole with 1 loop on top. Insert your hook there and complete a single crochet. The next one looks more like the V-shaped stitch that you're used to. insert your hook into the center of that stitch, picking up just the 2 loops there, and complete a single crochet. The next one is a hole with just 1 loop on top. We'll insert there and complete a single crochet. And then here we're going to be working on the edge again. When we're working here, you just want to make sure you don't work into the space in between the stitches, because that will pull the fabric and create a large hole. You want to work as close to the edge as you can. And I'm just going to continue working all the way down the side here, and then I'll show you how to work the corner, because we're going to increase the corner. You're going to work this border very similarly to how you would if you were making a scarf or blanket with a border. Alright, I am here at the bottom. I have just worked 1 stitch into my variegated box, which is the second row. I'm going to work 1 single crochet into the side of row 1, and then 1 single crochet into the foundation chain on the end there. That's officially my corner. I'm going to work just 1 more single crochet here in the same exact stitch. That way there's 2 stitches in this corner. Not as big of an increase as normal, but that gives me 1 stitch for the side edges to join to and 1 stitch for this shorter side to join to. And I'm going to rotate my fabric, and I'm going to do the same exact thing, single crochet. This time I'm just going to work across the opposite side of the foundation chain there. Looks very similar to V-shaped stitches that you're used to. Very easy to find the stitches. And now I've reached the corner. I'll do 2 single crochets into that corner stitch. Then I will rotate my fabric so that I can work up the side. I'm going to mimic the same thing that I did on the other side. So I worked the corner stitch in the foundation chain, and then in row 1, which is my white row, I worked a single crochet. As you want to end up with the same number of stitches on the second side as you had on the first side. And then we're just going to work up the side. This one looks a little bit different because this is where your yarn floats are, but you're going to work in a very similar manner. You're going to single crochet evenly. That means 1 single crochet into the side of each row. You're going to work as close to the side edge as possible. And the difference here is we're going to make sure that that float is being crocheted over so it's hidden. So for the next stitch, I'm just going to insert my hook there, working as closely to the side edge as possible. And as you can see, I inserted my hook into the variegated yarn here, but I have the white float on my hook. I'm going to yarn over, and when I complete my single crochet, it's going to cover up that float. And the entire thing will cover after you work both rows, because that float goes up 2 rows. So for the next one, I'll insert as close to the side edge as possible and crochet. And now that white float, you can't even see it. The next one is this variegated float right here. So I'll work as close to the side edge as possible, and then make sure that that float is also over my crochet hook so I can cover it. And then I'll work my single crochet. Work my single crochet into this next stitch. And you're going to continue working all the way across. Just work as close to the side edge as you can, that way it doesn't pull the fabric and make a big hole, and crochet over the floats as you go. You're going to work all the way up the side here. When we get to the end, I will come back and show you how to do this, since it's a little bit different because we didn't start with this top row. But I'm going to do this off camera and then I'll come back to you. Alright, I've reached the end here. I have one more row from the variegated yarn to work right here. Here I have the first stitch of the white color. We're going to insert our hook underneath the stitch as normal and work 2 single crochets. And then we'll just rotate our fabric and crochet right across the top, just working normally into those stitches. And now I've reached the very first stitch. I'm going to work 1 single crochet in there, and I'm going to slip stitch join to the first single crochet that I started with. That first single crochet is going to count as the first stitch from this increase. To slip stitch, I'm just going to insert my hook underneath both loops of that stitch, yarn over, pull through that stitch and through the loop that's on my hook. And now our round is complete. I'm going to fasten off with a really long tail because I'm going to use it to hand sew this wreath form cover on. If you run out of yarn, you can always add it later in the sewing process, it's fine, but I'm going to start with a really long tail. Longer than I think I need because I don't like when I run out. Then I'm going to fasten off. I'm going to go back to that loop that I have on my crochet hook and I'm going to pull up on it and just continue pulling until I get the end that I just cut off come through. That way it breaks this stitch. Then I'll thread this through a tapestry needle and use it to sew. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and weave in the other ends, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Alright, we're going to weave our ends in, so you'll need a tapestry needle. There's not very many ends to weave in, which is great. Just take your thread, insert it into the eye. I always like to do 3 passes when I'm working. That is the number that I feel the most comfortable with. If you feel comfortable after 2, this yarn catches really well. So if you feel comfortable after 2, you can fasten off after 2. I'm going to go into the stitch that's right above where my yarn is coming out of. And I'm picking up the whole stitch. Usually I don't at first, but I'm picking up this whole stitch here. And I'm just going to run it down under several of these variegated stitches here, coming out diagonally from the bottom. When I come out here, I am breaking that stitch in half so that the yarn will catch in there. So my needle's not coming out underneath the stitch, it's coming out in between, like it's breaking it in half. Then you'll tug on it. Use your fingers to manipulate the fabric so that it's not like all bunched up. Then I'll insert my needle into a nearby stitch. In this case it's white. And I'm going to break the stitch in half as well. So if I was picking up the whole thing, I would do this. But I just want to go into the center of it to break it in half. And then travel upward through the same stitches that I just worked through. And when I come out, I'll also break that stitch in half. Before I pull it through, I'm going to turn to the right side just to make sure I can't see my needle. If I did, then I would be able to see the yarn tail that I'm pulling through. So I just want to make sure I can't see it. That way it doesn't mess up the pattern I have on the front. And if you have trouble pulling this through, jewelry pliers are a really great tool. I keep this in my yarn bag. You just hold the fabric here with your left hand, grab the needle. You want to make sure that the eye of the needle is flat so that you can see directly down into it. And then just gently pull through. I say gently because if you pull too hard, you can break the eye of the needle. And then just pull the rest with my hand. That is my secret to weaving ends in with tough yarn. That's my second pass. I'm going to go into a nearby stitch, breaking it in half, travel back downward through the same stitches I just worked, coming out the middle of a stitch down here. And I'm going to use my jewelry pliers. My thumb is very sore right now, so. The yarn came out, but that's okay because I got it where I needed it. And I'm going to fasten off 3 passes. That's my magic number. That's weaving in your ends. I'm going to go ahead and do the other ones off camera. I have a couple where I had to join a new ball of yarn. Down here where we started this variegated yarn, I will weave it in sideways into that variegated yarn, very similarly to how I did on the top. This white tail from the very beginning, I'm going to weave it in up and down vertically instead of horizontally. I'm going to do it vertically. I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera, and then I'll be back with you. Do not weave in the top long tail that we fastened off. That one we're going to use for hand sewing. Alright, all my ends are weaved in. I have threaded my tapestry needle with the long tail end. The way I like to do it is lay the fabric down, wrong side facing, with the tail end on the bottom. That way when I bring it over, when you first go to wrap your wreath form, it will look like it does not fit. That's the way it should be. As you sew, you're just going to pull it together and it's going to stretch to fit. I always make the covers smaller than the wreath form, that way it stretches to fit. By nature, the acrylic yarn stretches 2+ inches, so this is not a big deal. I'm going to take my needle. I'm just going to whip stitch all the way around. I'm not going to show the whole thing. I'm just going to show you a little sample here. I'm just going to insert my needle into the top layer under both stitches there and grab the corresponding stitch from my bottom layer and come directly across and pull it all the way through. This is the only downside to having that really long tail end, is that you have to pull a lot of yarn through. You can't just continuously sew. Alright, I am very thorough when I sew this. I do not just whip stitch once through the stitches. I come directly across and then I go diagonally. So I just went directly across. Now I'm going to go back into that same stitch from the top, and I'm going to go directly downward to the left to pick up that stitch that's over there. You do not have to. You can just whip stitch 1 stitch per stitch all the way across. I'm just a little bit extra, and this is the way that I like to do it. So I'm going to go diagonally here. And now that I've gone diagonally, now I'm going to pick up the stitch that's directly above it, pick up both loops, come directly down, pick up both loops of that bottom one, and pull all the way through. And this is how I'm going to whip stitch around the entire cover. The important thing as you're working is to make sure that your stitches line up. You don't want to get to the end and your piece is uneven. So just make sure that your stitches line up as you work. You may even want to go ahead a little bit, line all the stitches up and put a stitch marker here. Line up and put a stitch marker if that's what helps you. Just make sure your stitches are lined up and even. I'm going to work off camera all the way around whip stitching. When I get to the end, I will come back and I will show you how to join the ends. Alright, I went ahead and did all the sewing all the way around my wreath form. This is where I have left off. The only thing we need to do now is sew up the two ends together. And you see this big gap here. This is nothing to worry about. We are going to stretch this wreath form a little bit. You're going to notice if you pull from the top, center, just pull with both hands downward and continue down the wreath form. Continue stretching just a little bit, not too much, just a little at a time. You'll see this come together. This yarn stretches so well. There's not holes in it from it stretching. It's got great coverage. So just stretch it a little bit till it reaches each other there, and then you can take the same needle and thread that you had and just whip stitch the two layers together. So I just went into the stitch from the top, then down through the stitch from the bottom. This one's a little bit tougher to do because the two layers are so close to each other and you're working straight up against the styrofoam. But just take your time. In the event that you have run out of yarn and you need to attach more yarn to do this, you can do so right in the seam and you won't even notice that it's there. Also, you want to make sure that when you're sewing this, that everything is lined up correctly, that your seam matches this seam and that your squares are lined up. And just, it should stay pretty much in place. It's not going anywhere, but just keep an eye on it to make sure that you're seaming stitches that are matching. That way your stitch pattern doesn't shift. Now I'm back around. There's just this tiny little gap here, and I'm just going to stitch diagonally. I might need to add another one here just to close it up. There, the seam is done. Now I can weave my ends in, and I'm just going to do it in the seam that's already there. Right here you can see that sort of slanted line right there in the center. I'm just going to insert my needle under several stitches following that line, and then I'll come back. I like to do 3 passes just like I do in any other part that I'm weaving in. It's my third pass. Just tug on it a little bit and now I can fasten off. And the wreath form cover is finished here. There's the center join. I knew that this part here would be wider than the rest of it, and this is why I started it with just one row on each side, because I knew with that border and the join that it was going to make it wider here. It's not a big deal. That's where I'm going to put my hanger to hang it from. Although I haven't decided what embellishments I'm going to add here, so if I add flowers or sign or anything like that, I'm going to move this to whatever angle it needs to be in, and I'll cover that up in that way. And then the crochet hanger will just hang from the other direction. But overall, I think that this reform turned out really cool. There's a lot that you can do with it, or with this pattern and all the color that it brings and texture, this is a great wreath that you can leave really simple because it's got all this detail here. So what I'm thinking is I'm going to go out to Dollar Tree and see what kind of sign I can find. Maybe something that fits right here in the center that I will hang, or maybe a really cute rabbit that I'll put down on the bottom to sit there. Maybe a little sign if I can find something. I'm just going to keep it really simple, especially with my colors, because I really want this reform to do the talking, and I don't want all the embellishments that I add to get lost. So I'm going to just find something that coordinates really well. I'm also going to put a wreath hanger, so I'm going to include a video here how to make that. And I've been contemplating adding a bow. I'm not sure if I want to do like a big white bow right here. I haven't decided yet. I don't know how I'm going to embellish it. So I'm just going to do the video showing how to add the hanger, and then I am going to head out. I want to go to Dollar Tree and to Michael's too. And when I come back, I will figure out how I'm going to embellish it. To make the wreath hanger, I'm going to start with a slip knot. And then we're going to do a chain 43. Next, we're going to single crochet into the second chain from the hook. We don't count this loop that's on our hook, so we skip this first chain, and into the second chain right in the center we're going to insert our hook, yarn over, pull through 2 loops on our hook, yarn over, and pull through both loops to complete a single crochet. We're going to continue single crocheting into each chain all the way across. At the end of this row, you're going to have 42 single crochets. Your work might curl, but that's okay because it'll straighten out whenever you work the next couple rows. Row 2, we're going to chain 1 and turn. Single crochet into the first 4 single crochets. Then we're going to chain 4, skip the next 4 stitches, and single crochet into the next 26 stitches. Next, we'll chain 4, skip the next 4 stitches, and single crochet into the last 4 stitches. And those skipped stitches, that's where the loop is going to go from wherever you're hanging this from. Row 3 is going to be chain 1, turn, single crochet into the first 4 single crochets, work 4 single crochets into the chain space, insert right into the chain space itself, picking up the chains on your crochet hook, and then you'll crochet over the chains. Then we'll single crochet over to the next chain space, we've reached the next chain space. We're going to do the same exact thing, insert into the chain space, picking up the chains on your hook, and work 4 single crochets into this chain space. Then we'll finish it off by working a single crochet into the last 4 single crochets. Row 4, chain 1, turn, single crochet into each single crochet all the way across, we're going to finish off with a border. We'll chain 1 and turn, single crochet into the first stitch, and each stitch all the way across, in this last stitch of the row, we're going to increase so that the fabric lays flat. We're going to do 3 single crochets into that very last stitch. we'll do this in each corner as well. Now it's time to evenly work down the side. In single crochet, that means 1 single crochet per row, and we want to work as close to the edge as possible. The next row you're going to see looks like the V-stitch you're familiar with working. Just insert right into the center, picking up 2 loops on your hook, and complete a single crochet. The next row looks like a hole and it just has 1 loop above it. The next one looks just like the V-stitch again. Insert into the center. And the next stitch here is going to be our corner, so we're going to work 3 single crochets into that stitch. And this is where our slip stitch was, so because it's not secured, this loop opens up. You can just hold the fabric and pull on that loop, and then we'll weave that in a moment to secure it. We'll drop that tail end and rotate our fabric so we can work on the opposite side of the foundation chain. It's very similar to working into the V-stitches, and it's very easy to find the stitches. So you'll just single crochet all the way across into each stitch. I've reached the last stitch of the row. I'm going to do the same thing as working all the other corners, 3 single crochets into that stitch. Then we're going to work up the side in a similar manner to how we did the other side. Single crochet as close to the edge as possible. They just look a little bit different than how they did on the other side, but same concept, 1 single crochet per row. And you want to make sure that you have the same amount of stitches here in the middle as you did on the other side so that it matches. So there's a corner, and then single crochet into the next 3 stitches, and then we're back at the very first stitch, which is going to be our first corner, and we're going to insert our hook into that same stitch and complete just 1 single crochet. Then we'll insert our hook underneath both loops of that first stitch, yarn over, pull through that stitch and the loop that's on your hook. That is a slip stitch join, and it counts as the last stitch of that corner. Now we can fasten off. Pull up on that loop to break it. Insert from the wrong side into that first stitch. Grab that tail end and pull it to the back. Now we'll just grab our tapestry needle and weave our 2 ends in. There's our finished wreath hanger. You put your wreath right into that hole at the bottom, and these buttonholes will go over your hook. This works on a door hanger as well as on a nail and on a command hook. Alright, so I found this sign at my local Dollar Tree. It's a hanging sign. It says Happy Easter, and it's got an adorable little bunny right there in the middle. I took my wreath form with me, just like this, and I went looking, putting signs in the middle and on it to see what I liked the best. And I've made a wreath similar to how I'm going to make this one before, so I really liked that, where I'm going to put it hanging in the middle. So the first thing I wanted to do, I really like this pink ribbon that's hanging in the back, that's hanging the entire sign. So I took those claw things that take staples out, and I removed the staples that were in the back holding the ribbon down. It was a little tough to get out, and I did end up using a thumbtack to kind of dig underneath it a little bit to pull it out enough so I could grab it with the claws. Just be careful because it's not very thick, and I did poke through a little bit over here. I'm hoping it's not really that noticeable, so I'm not going to worry about it. Didn't go all the way through, it just poked the cardboard like out a little bit. I'm going to save those pieces for another project, so that's why I didn't want to damage it too much. So the first thing I did to see how much I'm going to cut of this ribbon is I put it as if I was hanging it. So here's my wreath, and I wanted to see if I was going to hang the sign right there in the middle so that it was centered, where I would need to cut the ribbon. You know, let's just say that that's about right. So I just placed the sign in the middle of the wreath. It works the best if you have it sitting up. Right now mine is laying on a table. This is not going to give you an accurate reading. You need to have the wreath form standing up as if it was hanging on a door or on a hook somewhere, and then do this so that you can get an accurate measurement of where your ribbon needs to be. Let me flip it around to the back so I can show you what it looks like. It's about here. I thought about just cutting the ribbon and hot gluing it here to the wreath form. I don't want it to be visible on the back, so I'm not going to do that. You could absolutely do that. Be careful when you're hot gluing because it's going to come right through this ribbon, or if you had a very similar sheer ribbon, it would come right through. So just be careful when you're hot gluing that you don't burn yourself. But I'm going to weave this ribbon into my wreath form. That's my plan. So I wanted to make sure that I had plenty of slack so that I could weave it in. So I'm going to end up cutting my ribbon pretty close to the middle of this top sign, and then I'm going to weave it in. I'm also going to go ahead and cut the ribbon for the bottom because I don't need that bottom sign. This ribbon is going to fray, so what I'm going to do, instead of heat sealing it, I'm going to cut a little bit more and then fold it over and hot glue it to the back. So you're not going to see it, but I just want to cut a little bit extra ribbon. And now these two signs I'm going to save for a different project. And I'm going to grab my wreath form. The part that we sewed up, this part is where my hanger is going to be. So here's my crocheted hanger, and I'm going to, I'm just putting that on there, so I want my sign to fall on either side of it so that it kind of looks like this is holding it. If you're not using a wreath hanger, a crocheted wreath hanger like this, a door hanger would probably cover this up. Otherwise, you may consider putting a bow on here or a little group of flowers just to cover this up. But since I use crocheted hangers to put on my hook, it's going to cover that up for me. I'm going to go ahead and get this situated off camera so that I make sure that I have the correct position where it's going to be. But it's going to be very similar to this, but just hanging from the back side so that my ribbon is on either side. If you have a sign that does not have a ribbon, you can either attach a ribbon and sew it in the same way that I'm going to, or you could get it into position, crochet a chain that would go from the back of the sign up, and then sew in the ends on the back side of the wreath. I've done that on a patriotic wreath that I made, and I'll include that link in the description below if you want to do that. So the easiest way that I found was I went ahead and put it on the nail that's on my door. That's what the wreath hanger here is hanging from. And then I went to positioning it right in the center where it's going to hang, and I couldn't find my sewing pins, so I just have tapestry needles right here and on the other side as well, and they're pinned into the ribbon, the excess ribbon that I cut, just so I could get it in place. And I think my sign is a little bit small for my wreath, so it's not really falling forward, it's falling a little further back than I like, but I think I'm happy with this. It's a little tough to get it lined up in there, but I mostly was just going based off the space that was in between the corners to get it more centered. I'm going to go ahead and take it off my door now and go back to my table. One extra step I took before I took it off the door was I put a marker. Let me turn this around. This is the back side of the wreath. I put another tapestry needle because I was looking, but I'm not sure where my sewing pins are right now. So I put pins right here to indicate to me when I'm weaving in the ends that I want to do it on the outside of these pins. This is not an easy thing to do. It is much easier if you just hot glue it on, but I'm taking the challenge. The other thing I realized too, I was fighting with the sign trying to get it centered, but looking at the back, the staples aren't on there centered, so it wasn't hanging that centered, so I took that into consideration. I'm probably going to end up tacking this down a little bit, or maybe adjusting it as I weave it in. I'm not really sure. But let's take the plunge. I'm taking out the pin from the top, and I'm going to put the end in through my tapestry needle. And it's going to hang way back here. So this is where I'm going to start weaving. So I'm not going to go too far down because I want it to hang naturally, so I'm just going to start up here, and I'm going to weave under several stitches just like normal. And I can see here my ribbon is twisting, so I'm going to try to untwist that. And with this pin on the left still in place, it helps you with your tension. So I'm holding the sign here, and I just pulled out what I weaved in. I'm just pulling out until it has even tension with what's on the left side. And then I'm also checking to make sure that my spacing for the corners is still about even. And then I can go ahead and weave back in the other way. Just going into a nearby stitch as normal. And I'm going to weave back down through the stitches I just worked. The only difference here is I normally break stitches in half so that it catches better. I'm not doing that in this case. You could, because this ribbon is so sheer that it would just go right through, but I'm not worried about that. I think it's going to stick just fine. I'm going to check it. Yep, still in good position. And I always do 3 passes, so I'm going to come back down here and I'm going to do my 3rd pass. And I didn't have enough, so I'm just gonna re-thread it now as I have the needle in position. My scissors are not working very good. I need to get some new ones, so I didn't trim it, but it helped me pull it out, which is just as good. I'm going to go ahead and take this pin out. I don't need that anymore. And then I am going to fasten this off. And I left a little bit there when I pull out my hot glue gun to pin up the ribbon and such. I'm gonna fold this little piece over and I'm gonna put a dab of hot glue there just to hold that in place and to kind of seal the end. This is a good time to pick this up, put it back on your hanger, make sure that it's hanging correctly, as you can make adjustments as you weave in this second ribbon strand. And I'm going to start about the same exact place as I did on this side, just so that it still hangs evenly. It's right about here. And I'm just going to do the same exact process, weaving in under several stitches. And before I finish with this one, I want to check the tension as well. I think I might even, I'm going to flip it around just to make sure it's hanging correctly. And then I'll come back and I'll finish weaving in the ends.